All right, good. I'm going to go ahead and make the introductions. We're going to be talking with sales agent Rene Leda, producer Ray Ellingsen, film analytics expert Jeff Hardy, and we're also joined by Michael Praver, who works for funding.com, and Grace works with Ray to help people do development on their projects. So we've brought together quite a team of experts who are going to be talking specifically about the mechanisms by which independent producers can actually get minimum guarantees for their projects and actually get bank funding in order to put their projects together, which are based upon minimum guarantees. Because if you want to do a project that's going to be over $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, you have to have those things in order to get investors. You have to have those things in order to get the financial support that you need from a variety of partners in order to actually produce your project. And those are critical. And you need to do it before production because you use the funds that you get initially to be able to pay for cast, to pay for crew, to pay for pre-production, and then you get money from investors usually to be able to help you pay for things like finishing up production, doing editing, and then doing marketing after release. I think in the past, there are myths that go around town that it's impossible to get minimum guarantees, but the truth is you can get minimum guarantees if your project is correctly formulated. So with that in mind, Renee, do you want to talk for a few minutes about whether or not it's actually feasible and possible for people to get minimum guarantees on projects that are in the right budget range with the right talent attached, and what kind of budget range usually is involved when people are producing projects for that earn minimum guarantees?
Yes, sure. If we're talking of a film, a fiction film, the right spot today is the 3 million or under. We have to be very careful in the cast we're choosing. The cast has to have a lot of legs, being either a very good IMDb or a very high social media that will help us open the eyes of the streamers. Theatrical today is an iffy. It's difficult to to get your money back on the theater. So we are going to use more the theatrical release as a way of marketing and perhaps make money, but open the eyes of the streamers and the broadcasters. But we need elements. We can't just go with a good story. We need good story, good names. Everything has to be perfect.
When
Be
it
careful there.
when are there particular genres that seem to find it easier to get funding? If somebody's got a drama or romantic comedy or a thriller, what are the or fantasy, what are the things that seem to really be garnering interest in an
In
investment?
Yeah, in the budget that we are talking, the 3 million,
Mhm.
around the 3 million, a good horror has good legs in theaters.
Mhm.
That's what international distributors are looking more for. Dramas have to have a very high cast,
Mhm.
so it wouldn't work. I think the ideal is a horror film
Mhm.
with supernatural that has legs in theaters in the world, in the US and in the world today. Good comedies and thrillers are very good for streamers, going straight to streamers.
Mhm.
Horror, it has to be very special and having to do very good, then the streamers will take. But streamers are looking more for crime, for thrillers, crime series, and comedies.
Are there particular kinds of comedy that work and don't work when it comes to going to streamers both here in the United States? Are physical comedies better? Are talkie comedies better? Are romantic comedies better? Uh, I've always heard that comedy is one of the more dangerous things to produce, specifically because.
Romantic comedies are very good.
Mhm.
Those are great for the last thing you watch in the day so you can have a good sleep. if you look for a horror film at the end of your day, probably you'll have bad dreams. Good romantic comedies work very well.
Mm-hmm. I think so. When it comes to science fiction or horror slash science fiction, something that's feasible using the new kinds of special effects tools that people have access to, or incorporating elements that are generated
I
random.
leave I leave a little bit to Jeff about the if the sci-fi and horror, which one works better. I
Mhm.
think I still my buyers around the world are looking for horror, not sci-fi.
Really,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. So I should mention that Jeffrey Hardy, who is the owner of Film Profit LLC, which is a leading film analytics firm, and who looks at the statistics constantly to see what's selling here in the United States and worldwide, and what investment translates into what revenue. Having said that, do you want to talk for a few minutes about how the world sees science fiction or fantasy as opposed to horror films? Is there a significant difference in terms of how much they earn based on dollar invested? Actually, your mic's off. Jeffrey. Jeffrey. Oh, am I off?
I apologize.
There we
There you
go.
go. So start over again because you were talking and no one could hear.
It's like being in front of Congress or something. The guy's always, but yeah, I roughly agree with Rene. When I'm doing analytical studies, I really dig down into a lot of data, and yeah, there's a bit of a lag in data, meaning I'm looking at films that were released in 2024 and like that, and I'm watching big trends. And I don't want to speak for you, Rene, but what most distribution people talk about is what they're hearing at the market and this kind of stuff right now. You know what I'm saying? But I do see the business as a fad driven business. They're just as susceptible to fads as anyone else on the street. Just because you don't have a horror, that doesn't mean that you don't have a place to go. And so we work on a lot of films, and so a film may include elements that could be sci-fi or supernatural or various kinds of things like that. In general, I like genre films because they're easier to describe and kind of place. But does that mean that quality dramas, quality comedies, indie type, what we used to call specialty product, right? Art house specialty, it's not dead.
Mhm.
It still has a place to live. Is that easy? It's not easy. I think there's a lot of types of films, but the film business is a hard road anyway.
That's true. That is true. You have to design the product to find the market, and the market has to be there, which
And
actually,
I apologize, Nancy. You have to look at data,
Mhm.
and data will give you a path.
Mhm.
That may not just be, the straightest path right in front of you, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Renee, so if I create a lot of content, and if I know that if it takes if as a person who creates content and distributes content that I create and sells content, I'm well aware of the fact that you have to serve the target market that you have. So not every distributor has every single target market in the world. So some of them
Right.
are you're in a particular country and you know who your audience is, you know what they like, and you're going to try to buy that for them. When do you think that's why they're looking for producers to bring more of their market and more of an ability to tightly target the market, to know exactly who the market is and what the poster has to look like and what the trailers have to look like, so everything hits like they want the producers to do that. And I think in the old days there was a notion that distributors did that kind of stuff or that kind of marketing. But that's not what happens. You don't turn your film over to a distributor and he makes up all of this stuff. You have to bring it with you. Is that right?
You're going to work together with them. You're going to give them all the elements you can and help. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's the local distributor who knows their market
Mm-hmm.
and will and who's also putting money for the release and putting money as an MG.
Mhm.
So you'll have to work with him
So
because he knows his market.
will he actually tell you, listen, the trailers you gave me don't work. I need something different?
Yep. You have to be careful that because they're going to charge you back all those things.
Really?
Everything they spend is going to go into the recoupment of the box office in their country. So if you trust your distributor and he says that the trailer doesn't work, that he would like to do a new one, that you have to talk and understand what is he talking about and what it's going to cost so that he doesn't run a fast one at the end of the day.
Wow.
If I may, there is something that I've learned a long time ago. And by the way, Renee is correct. I've gotten a bill from distributors in the past that is a mile long, and you go, "What is all this?" And they're like, "Oh, you approved all." And you go, "Well, what? You were charging me for that?" And they charge you for everything. Like lawyers, they bill by the 15 minutes. But my point was, one of the things that we do in development is we work with people like Rene, Leda, who's a producer's rep, who's working directly with distributors. So while we're in development, before we even shot one frame, we already know what the distributor is going to require, which is going to save everybody a lot of hassle in the long run.
Is it the case that usually you try to get one big buyer, or do you try to fit together multiple buyers offering multiple minimum guarantees in order to put a project together, Renee?
Depending on the size of the film, you can get distributors that will buy all Latin America, for example,
Mhm.
will buy all Latin America without Brazil, or
Mhm.
might buy the Southern Cone and might buy Colombia and Ecuador. So you have to work with those trusted distributors. And before the release, you're going to ask them for a plan, and they cannot spend more than what they say they're going to spend and you approve. If they go over the budget, that's on their dime, not yours, not the film's. So you have to work with trusted distributors, basically. That's the key.
So so I think Ray's talked about working with a producer's rep and the difference between working with a producer's rep and working with a sales agent versus and trying to work directly with distributors yourself. Can you talk about when a producer's rep comes on board a project? Is it a lot of times sales agents, they don't want to come in too early. They want to make sure there's actually going to be a film.
They want trusted people to bring their projects to them.
Mhm.
The creators not always know the different distributors around the world
Mhm.
or the sales agents, reputable ones who are doing good job, who are specialized in a particular genre. So all those factors are important at the beginning when you're starting to package a new film.
Mhm.
May I? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Renee.
No, you go.
I was going to say, may I differentiate sort of my experience of a sales agent versus a producer's rep?
Please.
So, a sales agent, in my experience, and I've never had a great relationship with any sales agents. I had great relationships with producers reps. For some reason, Renee still returns my calls. But a sales agent, usually you're correct. You finish the film, you take it to sales agent, he takes it out to distributors. They will shortchange you a lot of times because they have low-hanging fruit and they're going to go, "Oh, here's your worldwide distribution deal. I get my percentage. See you later." And they'll come in again after you finished your film. So they have something you go hawk their wares with. A producer's rep, a good one, like Renee and a very few others, will come in during development. They'll work with you through the development process to cut some of those issues you're going to have later on with the distributor, like deliverables, making sure that the trailer's right, making sure you have the right cast that they can sell, making sure you've built an audience. So a producer's rep will come on in development, work with you through the development process, through pre-production and post, and then all your deliverables will be lined up. So their job is much easier because they've worked with you through that whole process. They've talked to people like Jeff Hardy through the process. Jeff gives them an analytics package, which is, and again, analytics is just a blueprint. It's a methodology of deployment into the marketplace. And if you have somebody reputable like Film Profit who's putting together that blueprint for you and working with a distributor and a producer's rep, it's a much more straightforward path to execution.
It sounds, does the producer's rep come on at the same time you bring on, you're doing the development process, where you're doing the film analytics? You've got the screenplay, you've had professional readers read it to make sure that it's a good screenplay. You're starting to work, you're working with the film analytics team to figure out what kind of cast you should attach. Like, at what point are you bringing Rene on?
We bring Rene, or we bring a producer's rep on early on when we get a client and they sign up and they go, okay, I'm ready to go. 1, 2, 3, let's go. We have a series of drawdowns that first you want to take care of the analytics, get the budget and schedule that's bondable. You get all these elements, but initially what our company does at Moving Pictures Media Group is we get all of the vendors together, the analytics people doing artwork, the social media people, we get the producer's rep, and we do a vendor meeting on behalf of the client early on. And so that we're all on the same page. And so Rene and Jeff and myself and a bunch of others have been on numerous Zoom calls in the beginning stages so that we're all on the same page and we all have the same marching orders moving forward with what we're doing with this project.
So
yes, they come on very early.
So it sounds like you bring on, I think you also mentioned you bring on an attorney in early in the development process, because you have to specify who owns the screenplay or who has licensed the screenplay.
You want to make, even when somebody does a submission on our portal, we want to see proof of copyright. There may be a chain of title involved. We want to know exactly who owns what, so there's no issues down the road.
Right.
We call that squared away in the process of submission. Once we have that and the client says, yes, let's move forward, then we say to the client, great, we're going to have a vendor meeting. We get all the vendors together. We get on the same page as far as the project. What do we think of the budget is? What do we think of the analytics are going to show us for who's our audience? What's the saturation of that audience? We get with the producer's rep on that vendor call and we go, hey, how are we going to deploy this into the marketplace? Is it going to be streaming? We just had one recently where we all got on, and I can't remember if it was Rene or Jeff, one of the two, came up with, this isn't a theatrical release. Oh, we're going streaming. No, this is going to be a festival run. And we all went, oh my God, you're right. Because when you put it all together, that is the most straightforward method of deployment. And so you never know until you get all these people together. And I always refer to it as I get people who are smarter than me in the room. And we sit down and we figure out exactly what we're up against so that we're all on the same page moving forward and we can maximize the potential of distribution into the marketplace.
So I think a lot of times when people get into the film market, the film industry, they have this notion that even though they're spending $3 million is enough to build an apartment building that's going to generate $20,000 of revenue every single month from here until the end of time, let's say. Some people have the notion that when you're producing a $3 million film, that you don't have to do the same kind of planning, the same kind of financial, make the same kind of deals in terms of getting loans and in terms of getting probably perhaps investors, et cetera, on board in order to be able to do this deal. But what you're indicating is that when you're doing films of a certain size, you have to make sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, you have the right people on board, or you're gonna not get your $3 million and be trapped in limbo forever, or you're gonna produce the film and it'll be a loss. Is that pretty much where we are?
There's a little bit to unpack there. I think your analogy about buying an apartment building is accurate in the sense that there's a lot of moving parts. And I think when you're doing film, there's a lot of moving parts. There's development. And when you're talking about financing, you're not just talking about production financing. You're talking about development financing, which is where somebody like Michael Praver comes in. Say you're going to spend $50,000 to $85,000 on development. Most people do not have that sitting in their sock drawer. They go to somebody who's a finance facilitator like Michael Praver, who can come in and go, okay, here's stage one of your movie. Stage one is development. We're going to fund development and get a game plan that makes sense so that when we execute this into the marketplace, it has a chance of making a profit in it, or at least its money back. And so that stage one of financing is, its own animal. And once you get to the point where you have a complete package, you have a line item in the production budget, pay back all development costs plus 20%. So that's made whole from the business side. And then you move into the production side. Let's call it a $3 million film. By the time you go to the bank or through something like the SBA or NorCal or private equity or a deficit financing deal through somebody like Amazon or Hulu, whatever your source of finance is, then you've got another business that you've just started, which is production. And that production is, okay, now we've got to build this production. We've got to hire the crew, the cast, get everything going, deliver it to the distributor under the terms and conditions that were signed initially so that we meet those deliverables so that it can then be put into the marketplace. So it is a very complicated process. Again, and I say this a lot, a guy named Sam Arkoff, and if nobody listening knows who Sam Arkoff is, go look him up. He has a book called Flying Through Hollywood by the Seat of My Pants. He is the reason we all, as independent filmmakers, actually can work nowadays. He once said that the film business is 95% business and 5% film. And if more filmmakers understood that, they'd be much more successful. So when you're talking about financing a film versus financing an apartment building, they're both businesses. And they're almost the exact same thing.
And they're capital intensive because you have to put the money up before the building is available to rent.
Before you see the results of your profit, correct.
Renee, when you do a deal and
Yes.
so you're working with people and are you selling the film from the very beginning? You're working to help design and development, and you're helping people figure out what kind of talent if it's expected to do well in Asia or expected to do well in Latin America, you're helping them figure out maybe what talent they could get that would bring extra market in that territory. Can the filmmaker call you and say, hey,
What do you think of this actor?
yeah, what do you think of this actor? Or this, I could get this actor, but he seems like he's going to be really expensive. Is he really worth it? Is he going to pay off for me if I put this guy in the
Yes,
project?
we do that. We do that, and we will also, I'll call Jeff and ask him to get from Jeff and Ray and also an opinion. Yes, definitely.
And sometimes we actually employ a casting director early on in development as well, in some cases where Rene will go, hey, look, this is not a story about a story. This is an actor-driven story, and we're going to need actors that have names. And so in those cases where Rene goes, look, this is going to be a hard sell, or Jeff may come in and go, hey, look, some things are about the story. This is about who's going to be in this if we're going to try to get a profit out of this. So then we'll bring in a casting director to work with the other vendors and have Rene and the casting director and Jeff and the casting director and our social media people and the casting director all connect so that we're on the same page as far as how we're going to put this together.
And we have so much money. What can we do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you were mentioning that when it comes to development funding, so there's a stage at the beginning when you're putting together a project this size. There's the stage where you hire a lawyer and you create the LLC that's going to produce the project, and that LLC is the one that does deals with everybody else. It's the corporate veil that you employ in order to protect your personal assets like your house and like your car. And so you bring on a lawyer and you have to hire that lawyer in advance to be able to do to be able to put the project together. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of contracts that he has to be able to create for a filmmaker that they may not understand? Because I think a lot of filmmakers are like, I'm just going to produce my film. It's $3 million. I'm going to skip the legal part. It doesn't matter. This doesn't matter at all. But the truth is that you can't fund a film that's $3 million unless the intellectual property and all the rights, everything is done by the book, if you want to keep your shirt.
Sure. let's talk a little bit about some of the vendors that we employ in development. I mentioned Film Profit. I mentioned Rene Leda, who's on with us. I mentioned bringing in development financing through somebody like Michael Praver. We have social media people that we deal with. We like a company called Prometheus. We deal with Ribbo Media, who's well known. One of our vendors is a legal firm. And we have several legal firms lined up. One of our partners is a gentleman who's an entertainment attorney, and he oversees the legal process for our clients. A gentleman named Ron Takahara, and he has law firms that will work together with us. So we bring in a law firm in development. It's one of the line items in the development budget, and they will take care of things like setting up the LLC, or limited liability company. They'll take care of things like the agreements between the producer's rep and the client, the distribution agreements. They'll bring in all the vendor agreements. There's an agreement with Film Profit and all the other vendors. So these agreements are set up to protect, and they're between the filmmaker and the vendor, and in some cases with the distributor directly. So there are a series of documents to protect the filmmaker moving forward. There's things that we do with the legal, which is setting up a chain of title in some cases to make sure the copyright is secured. Because a lot of people didn't write their script. They acquired the script. They're a producer. They come in and going, hey, this guy wrote it. He's my best buddy. We went to high school together. That's great. Now let's get an assignment of rights so that you clearly own the intellectual property. So your buddy isn't going to get drunk and throw eggs at your window and decide he doesn't want to give you the screenplay anymore. So there's a lot of little small legal things that get taken care of in development. And so your development legal is just one other line item that takes care of all those agreements and contracts between the vendors, sets up the chain of title for the copyright, sets up your LLC formation. So that LLC can make deals with a distributor. That LLC protects all members under that company. So it's not complicated. It's just one of the other line items and one of the other vendors that we bring in during development. Once you get through development, then you have production legal, which is just a bigger version of what you just went through in development.
But it's covered by the funding that you've put together.
Correct.
So, Renee, when people give tell me what the characteristics are for when you're actually going to be able to get a minimum guarantee from a distributor saying that if you sign this contract and you deliver the film to the specifications, you're guaranteed to get this amount of money. And then tell me what you can do with that minimum guarantee in order to raise money before your project's produced.
You will get a big film will get a minimum guarantee from the beginning. You bring a Tom Hanks film, just to give a name. But if we're working in the 3-4 million, we are probably, the deal is going to be that when we deliver the masters, etc., that's when the sales agent will give a minimum guarantee. Will pay the first minimum guarantee.
Right. So that's when they actually give the check. But
yes,
but they make a promise. Is it tranched? So they say we're going to give you $400,000 and you're going to get 50K or 100K up front, and then X amount 6 months later, and then X amount 6 months later. Is it tranched that way, and then you can borrow against the whole sum?
yes. So the sales agent has to be reputable. The bank has to believe in the sales agent.
Or a producer's rep, in your case, right?
No. Because the sales agent is the one who's going to give the MG when the film is completed. So he has to be a reputable sales agent where the bank will lend against that MG. The sales agent needs to believe also in all the production. They will not commit to anybody. So we need to have the cast. They will ask for the LOIs from the managers to understand that the cast is really signed and not a promise cast that never happens. The distributors around the world will also, when the sales agent says, oh, we have a Tom Hanks, they might call the manager of Tom Hanks and say, are you really signed for this film? Because of course, a film with a high-end cast will get better MGs around in all the different steps of the commercial, of the
Mhm.
exploitation of the film. I've had cases where the producer promised to have this cast a certain name, and it was all bullshit. And when he delivered the film, the sales agent comes to you and says, "These are not the names we discussed.
Mhm.
Sorry," and breaks a contract. So there's a lot of trust, and that's where the lawyers also are important to specify all those things in the agreements, not only on the initial, but also on the sales, the contract that the sales agent makes with the different distributors and what you and the producer makes with the sales agent.
But the good news is, and I just not to make it sound, I hope I don't make it sound too hard or too grim. The good news, because really in real life, I know a lot of people who have tried to produce a $3 million film, some of whom have succeeded and be pretty unhappy with the results because they didn't have minimum guarantees, because they ended up getting their money from investors without having dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and got sued by the investors because there are rules about this kind of thing.
I prefer a good sales agent than an MG when delivering the master.
Yeah.
I want, yeah, I prefer a good sales agent that's going to go, that has a real network of distributors around the world.
That's cool. Michael, one of the questions that I think people have is in one of the reasons that you're such an asset. You've obviously participated by sponsoring a lot of my workshops, which has been very meaningful since we met, I guess, what, 2015, 2016, like a long time. But one of the things that has always impressed me is the fact that you're an expert in a huge number of different kinds of funding. I've known people who've gone to you in order to get equipment funding, in order to find out how to work with the SBA, to find out how to, they've got they're business owners and they've got put all of their, or production companies, and they've got credit cards that they put everything on personal credit cards, so they can't buy a house because basically they've been using their personal credit cards totally to fund their business, and they've never figured out how to toggle over to doing business credit. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that I think you funded more dozens of filmmakers, many of which I know. Can you go ahead and talk for a few minutes about how you work with filmmakers when they're first starting out versus the ways that you help them as time goes by?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, I have funded 65 filmmakers so far. The vast majority of them were from Ray and Grace, and it's not always the same purpose. Most of them come for development, but occasionally they're coming because they made their own film and they ran out of money at the end, or they want to do a short and it's something that is so small that it doesn't really fit the model of Ray and Rene and Jeffrey and Grace. Yes, we do over 16 different types of funding, but the majority of what we're doing for filmmakers are often what we would call a startup business. And we do startup businesses all over the country. And what it really means is that they don't have an existing business and an existing income. And in that case, we're often using their personal credit. It could be one person, it could be two people, it could be a married couple, it could be business partners, it could be the parents of the filmmaker. I've done every scenario you could think of. And it's true that there are multiple types of funding. So we might be able to do one, two, or even three different types of funding. So we might choose to do one over another. Maybe the issue of credit is a little more thin and we have to do two types at once. But we do it in a very educational style and we don't charge any upfront fees. So it really starts with just a conversation, or sometimes two or three conversations to make sure everybody understands what we're doing and what they're bringing to the table, because it's what they're bringing to the table. Is it personal credit? Is it one person or two or three people? What's the goal? Because Ray actually early on brought me three people that were business partners, and they had done a round of funding with what I would call friends and family. So they had raised about $300,000 with friends and family. They were trying to do a $600,000 direct to digital kind of film. This was really early. I think this was 6 months after I met Ray.
Mhm.
And based on the personal credit of those three people, because they didn't have other partners that were borrowers,
Mhm.
I was able to get them about 100,000 each. They got to their 600,000 and they went forward with their project. So we're not dictating what people are doing, but the vast majority of my film clients are using that money for development, not production at all.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I think I also know that you've mentioned that sometimes people have a production company, and most production companies seem to be flung together by very passionate people, and they don't always, and also they don't always have access to the same kinds of resources that other businesses have for a wide variety of reasons. Like if I want to go start a dry cleaners, it's easy for me to go to the SBA right up front, just say, hey, just this dry cleaner is making X amount of money. I want to buy it and take it over. And they go, the SBA will help me do it, and they'll do it cheaply. But if you go to them and you're saying you're making a film, you got to jump through some hoops in order to make that work. It can be done, and Ray's actually got a good background in the SBA, but you've in the situation where people have put themselves in a bad way because they have funded stuff personally, you help them make. If I produced one project and then I want to produce a second project or a third project, I'm actually a proper production company now. I may be in the situation where even though I'm a proper production company, even though I have credits, even though I have revenues coming in, my personal credit's still in the tank because I've been doing everything not through a business.
That's correct, but also there's a couple of other factors. So one factor is, of course, personal credit, because no matter what type of business funding we're doing with banks, it always comes back to who is the borrower? Do they have good personal credit? It may be other things on top of that, but it always goes back to the personal credit. But that's why I was calling filmmakers startups,
Mhm.
because we do both existing businesses and startup businesses, but filmmakers, even if they've been in the game for a while, the nature of the business and the cycle that it takes, which is often years between projects, doesn't make them look to the bank like the business a bank wants. A bank wants daily, hourly, or weekly income, like a plumber. A bank loves a plumber because he's going to work 5 days a week or 6 days a week. He might even sometimes work 7 days a week. A filmmaker, no matter how successful, it's a cycle that might be every 2 years, every 3 years, every 18 months, but it's not what the banks are looking for. So again, they fall into the startup category because they don't have the consistency. Now, I will give you a couple of exceptions to that rule, and that is I've worked with a couple of production companies that are what I call commercial.
Mhm.
They're doing basically advertising.
Mhm.
Now, those companies are often very consistent. I worked with one that I think they had something like 22, I think it was Ford or Chevy dealerships around the country, and that's all they did. That is consistency that a normal filmmaker or film production company wouldn't have,
Yeah,
because
unless you'd have to
it's
actually have that if you were a production company and for some reason you were producing some sort of game show or something and you're doing it week after week
there
and
you go.
generating revenue, then it would work. Which actually kind
Right.
of brings up the question, Renee, do you ever work with people on producing something that is likely to be quickly recurring revenue? Do you work with people on television projects as well as on films, or do you focus only on film
No, both.
projects?
There is I think the limits, the borders are totally broken, and you never know where a project is going to end. You will focus on theatrical, but perhaps it goes straight to streamer. If the streamer goes nuts, perhaps the streamer will partner with you in releasing the film because it'll help them for the marketing, but it might go straight to streaming. Yeah, no.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps you have a pilot, you have a film project, and it might be a better series.
Mm-hmm.
It can go, or the film you produce becomes the pilot of a series.
And actually, that kind of brings up a good question. Renee, Ray, do you help people? Let's say, for example, I want to do an animated series. Let's say, and I've got a proof that I've proved to you that I'm using Character Studio, or I'm using this, which is the same tool, Animator Studio and Character Studio from Adobe are the same tool that commercial cartoon makers use to create the cartoons all of the time. They use them to create all kinds of content on a regular basis. Let's say I bring to you a cartoon project and I say, look, I want to do 10 half hours of this. And I only really I can hire name talent because it's cheap, because I only need to put them into the recording. I only need to put them into a sound booth basically to get the audio that I need. And I've got somebody good designing the characters. Here's what the project's going to look like. Here's a 10-minute sample. If I give that to you, or if Jeffrey Hardy takes a look at it and Renee takes a look at it, is that something that you can help people actually develop and turn into a project that can sell?
Sure.
Get licensed?
Yeah, you hit on 2 points there. So let me try to address both of those. The first point is, yes, if you come to MPMG with hey, I've got a series, it's a cartoon series, whatever it is. First thing we're going to do is go to Jeff and see if there's a market for it. Where's the market? Is this something for FX? Is this something for Nickelodeon? What is the market for this? Once we discover the market, we're going to bring in somebody like Rene, and he's going to go, here's the access to it, here's the appetite for it. And along with the analytics data and the actual market for distribution, we're going to figure out, is there a home for this? And if there's a home, what's the revenue return potential on that home? So a lot of things come into play. That's when you figure out what your budget's going to be. There's a lot of moving parts to that. Now, the other side of that is, so yes, we can take a series and find a home for it based on the analytics data, the distributors, is there a market? How do we reach that market? What's the appetite for that market? Those are things that we all discover in development. One of the questions that always comes up is, oh, what if I bring in this and I spend $50,000 to $75,000 in development and there's no market? It's not like we're rolling the dice and hoping there's something out there. We're building a market through social media. We're building market, finding the distributor before anybody spends any money. We have a good idea whether or not this is going to actually have the potential to have legs. I have unfortunately turned away a lot of clients and just said, look, it's not that you have a bad project, but go get some coverage on it. Go to script services, go somewhere and get another pair of eyes on this, and make sure that you're creating a marketable product or content that there's actually an audience for. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, and this has happened to us, man, Jeff, I want to say more in the last 2 years than it's happened in the last 10 years, where we have a project and they go, hey, it's a feature film. And we go, actually, Rene or somebody comes on and goes, actually, this could be a series and here's where the home of that could be. And we wind up going, oh, actually, let's make this a pilot for a series. And then we've had people come with a series, and we actually have a client right now who they have a series, they think, and we're looking at the analytics and we're going, you got to get a showrunner, you got to find a network, let's just make this a feature. And if it's that great, then it can be used as a pilot or a kickoff point to a series. Look at the original Stargate movie, which became a 10-series sci-fi hit. They didn't make the feature Stargate with the idea of turning it into a series, but it just happened to fit that profile and model later down the road. So we don't, you could say, hey, we got a series, and it could be a series, but then again, it could be a feature. We don't know until we delve into that analytics. I see Jeff has something to put into that.
I was going to say, because Jeff has, I would
right,
think
Jeff.
Jeff has a lot of interesting insights. One good thing about animated content is it's easier to localize than most other kinds.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Hold on one second.
You're not asking me to talk about localizing, are you?
No, I'm asking you to talk about, I had some interest in talking
Yeah,
about animated projects.
series and or which way to go. Really what we're talking about is a strategy. And strategies are always best from multiple minds, which is why we work together and share ideas, brainstorm. I might come in because I've scoped out the project and I have my viewpoint and I typically do some research, so I don't come in and I'm just blabbing. And Rene will think something else. And I often go to Rene and go, can we do this? Can we get this? This is what we've got to get. Is that possible? Do you see that world? Etc. That said, if you come in and you're dead set on mounting a series from go, I'm just going to tell you that's complicated. In my world, it's very complicated because we're tracing an arc, a financial arc, which is a whole series of transactions. Not exactly the same as a slate, but almost as complicated as a slate to a certain degree. It's harder. That's what I'm going to say. So I think the strategy is extremely crucial. That's what we're trying to do, is develop a strategy along with all the things that support it in documentation and elements, etc. Guys,
because if you're doing a TV show, if you're doing a live action TV show, you have to tie up people, real actors, for several months. If you're doing an animated series, you have to tie them up for several days or several weeks to get all the audio you need to shoot all the episodes. When Rene, do you want to talk for a few minutes about the kinds of content? Does kids content? I have a lot of people that say, I want to do a kids project, or I'm anime and all of these other, and kids cartoons are popular with a lot of people that create content. Can you talk a little bit about what the market is worldwide for that kind of content? Is it is it good, bad, indifferent? Is there an advantage in doing it for? I knew somebody who made quite a lot of money, oddly enough, making Spanish language cartoons because there were not a lot of people. He said there just weren't a lot of cartoons to compete with.
Okay.
His experience.
I think that what's going on today is people are cutting their cable. So the animation is suffering a little bit, I think. The media, the ideal media for preschool animation today is YouTube.
Really?
Yeah, I think the kids, when you go in a mall and you see a mother with young kids, where are they looking at cartoons on their cell phones? The Discovery Kids, those channels are probably repurposing or remaking using their own IPs than getting new ones. The producer, the creator needs to be out, and I think YouTube is a great market, or the Tubies or the Plutos, but I think the kids are going more and more to YouTube, and there they can really develop the brand and be able to start making money in the merchandising.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
That you just hit on something, Rene, if I may.
Thank you.
I sat on a panel discussion a couple of years ago to South by Southwest with a rep from Nickelodeon. And she blew the audience away when they brought up the whole thing of children's content. And she said it is extremely regional. And there's 3 things that you need to have if you're going to make children's content. One is, who's the region? Are you doing it South America? Because that audience, children's audience, is substantially different and somewhat more sophisticated than American children audiences. Disney and everything's been dumbed down for American children. Is it going to Europe? Is it going? So where is your region that you're targeting, first of all? Second of all, how do you reach that audience? Have you done any? Because now she'd said Nickelodeon no longer does test groups. They used to do children's test groups and they found it was too expensive and kids grow up too fast and the next generation wants something totally different. So what she found out was, you get marketing, you get social media, you start building an audience based on the region that you're going after, based on what that audience's appetite is. And then the third thing is the advertising. You go to the advertisers and they're going to determine how much money you're going to get, because they're going to determine how much of an audience they can reach based on their product going to that region. So it's extremely complicated. I remember sitting there listening to her and everybody's head was turned toward her and she was like, no, I ran out of things to say, I'm done. But everybody had a million questions based on that after that.
I think it's because people have a notion that it's going to be super, super easy. And it's not necessarily, it's like whenever you're talking about a series, it's always a more complicated step. But I do think it's correct that there's a total blending of film and television. It's the gaps between those things seem to have evaporated in a lot of ways.
And you have big names, big actors going straight to a TV series.
Right.
And before it used to be, oh, you work in TV. Kind of.
It was like a Chinese wall. You would never see Tom Cruise on a television show. It just would never happen. Or think about all the people you do see on television that you never imagined you would see. So we talked for a while. I think what I'd like to do is if you have questions that you want to ask the panel, first of all, Grace, do you want to go ahead and put a link to Motion Picture Media Group so they know how they can reach out to you and ask questions?
Yeah.
And I think, Jeffrey, do you want people to contact you directly? And if so, do you want to put your email address? Make sure when you're typing into the chat window, you select everyone, the word everyone.
Right.
So that it goes to everybody. And Rene, how should people reach out to you if they've got a project that they want to talk to you about?
I think the easiest way is to reach Grace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Okay, cool. If you guys can go ahead and put the links so that we can move on to the questions part, that will be great. I'm going to go ahead and check the questions that are here in the Q&A window. For those of you that are watching, go ahead and click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or somewhere on your screen if you're listening on your phone, and you can go ahead and ask a question related to your project and stuff that you want to ask somebody about, so we can answer the questions here on the phone. And remember, you can always reach out to Ray and Grace and folks after the event. You can also reach out to me. Also, I'll be sending out a link to this video to anybody that signed up for the call, just in case. So the first question we have is, are episodic products in higher demand than features? And there's 2 questions I would ask. 1, are they in higher demand? And 2, do they earn more? Generally speaking.
I think it's difficult to respond. Episodic will go straight to television. Films will have a chance in the theatrical release first and then go to the streamers or television, where everybody's watching more and more.
I think what you're looking at is different formats of content. You've got feature format of content, you've got episodic. I don't think one is in more demand than the other. I would certainly say episodic is somewhat more complicated to get launched into the marketplace as opposed to feature film. But there is a large demand for both of those formats.
Yeah.
Cool. And do you think I think you were mentioning last time we spoke that it's significantly larger. There had been a domination for a while where indies were having a harder time. Just seemed like the world just got a lot more complicated. Maybe it was COVID, who knows what it was, but it seems like there's really been a significant opening up over the last months or a year.
There was finance issues that independent films were having a hard time getting financed. You couldn't do the deficit financing model directly through streaming services because during COVID, what happened with Netflix is they just opened up and they bought foreign content at pennies on the dollar, and we couldn't compete as independent filmmakers. Right now, there's a question that we'll answer in a moment about documentaries, but documentaries are extremely hard to monetize because Netflix is paying what, Jeff, 30 cents on the dollar for a documentary right now?
Yeah, they're just, documentaries are, they're not that fungible.
And having said that, I don't want to discourage that. When we get to that documentary question, there is a way around that. And I do want to address that, but let's move through our other questions right now.
Cool. So what's the base cost for MPMG's development process with legal and the budgeting and the analytics and the financing and the having a producer's rep on board and all that? Is it in the range of 100K or is it in the range of 25K or does it vary by project?
It varies by project because some people already have a budget and schedule, so you don't need to bring that in. Some people have social media. So what we do is we do a specific development budget, not a production budget, a development budget with the requirements that are necessary to meet the requirements for production funding. And that could be somewhere between $50,000 to $80,000. If you're adding things like, let's add a graphic novel element to it, that increases, but you're looking at 50 to 75,000, somewhere around there, to bring in a full service suite of data analytics, all the elements necessary so that when you will have a complete package to take to financing.
And do you have references available if people want them? And do you have credits for people who've worked with you in the past that have gone all the way from working with you all the way through having a finished product?
Sure, we do. 90% of what we do is we provide development services and send clients on their way. Occasionally we'll get involved and do a work for hire in association with co-production on certain projects. But in general, we will go ahead and get the package ready, take the package to financing for the client. And then we, as I say, like taking them to the prom, pinning on their corsage and sending them on their way. But we will take them all the way through to get their financing so that they can go make their film. And if they require our services, such as production services, we can negotiate those arrangements as well.
Cool. But so if they already have somebody else to do production, you're not going to step on that?
No, we don't. It's not our deal. And yes, we do have references. Go ahead, Michael. You were about to say something.
Yeah, I just thought of something. So we were talking earlier about most of the people that come to our company from Moving Pictures Media Group initially are coming to us for development fees.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to make sure that people understood that it doesn't matter what you're using the money for. So once we're talking, we find out what the development budget is, because usually MPMG has completed a development budget for that client. But on top of the development budget, there are often other fees that are things that the borrower might be interested in. I will just mention a few. Some people come to us and say, I only need X amount of money because this is Ray's list and this is exactly what I need. But we charge fees on top of whatever we are able to bring the client. Also, we suggest that the client over borrow so they have enough money for 3 months, 6 months, maybe even 9 or 12 months worth of payments for those loans, because they're taking out loans, but 30 days later, you owe your first payment on those loans. Also, sometimes people come to me and they say, I need an extra $20,000 for an assistant. I need another $25,000 because I'm working less because I'm doing this. I'm focusing on this film and I'm working less and I'm going to have a shortage. We don't care. We're here to help. So If they need 75,000 and they can qualify, we're thrilled. But if they need 75,000 and after discussion it turns into 150, great. It's whatever the client needs, assuming we can get it.
Cool.
Just thought I'd mention that because that's in every single conversation.
I definitely think it's a case that some people will say, they'll say, I just need to do this much development. Then they'll go, but I would like to have a book, or I would like to have, I have other things that I want to do that are in addition to the book.
Well,
Don't
and
make
we
me
can,
write that.
we generally work with a client and go, hey, look, talk to Michael Praver, but think about how you're going to make the payments for the next 6 months. Think about Michael doesn't charge any upfront fees, but he does get paid once he provides financing for you, gets a percentage of what he raises you, which is more than fair. And you have other considerations. So we try to walk, Michael's correct. We try to walk the client through thinking all the way through, hey, you're going to need this to get to here, which is financing. And then all that will be returned plus 20% from a line item out of the production budget. So as long as you have an exit strategy for it, I'm not afraid to take money if I know I can get it back somehow and I have a good plan of execution to get.
And I think you'd mentioned that in addition to the fact that you've helped people, so you help people with the development, they get to the development process. You've also, people have done turnaround, which means they fully developed a product, they got a project, they've got it to the point where it's fundable, it's got all the people it wants to have attached. And then all of a sudden the filmmaker just doesn't want to do it anymore, or their condition changes, and then it becomes, you can sell projects and turn around because the project's already put together. And did you want to address that, Ray, and then we'll go up to Jeff real quickly.
Actually, let Jeff address that up front.
Yeah. One of the things I do, not as part of every package, but various packages, I've got one I'm doing now, I can do what's called a turnaround study.
Mm-hmm.
Turnaround study gives us a range of potential value for the developed project. But also, what I've been wanting to say is every single step that we take in development, and even if you don't work with us, you do it all on your own. Every single step you take is meant to inject value into your project and move it toward fruition. It's not just to spin gears and spend money. It's literally making a valuable package for your film. And by package, I don't just mean stacks of paper. You've got a strategy, a thrust, a methodology, and a plan.
Well, okay, so I want to just go back to the real estate thing, because people get real estate. They're intuitively understanding it. I'm in Santa Monica, and I see a lot, and I want to buy the lot, and I want to put an apartment building on. So the first thing I have to do is I have to figure out how I'm going to buy that lot. And second of all, I got to figure out how to build on it. Third of all, I got to figure out how many apartments to put into it and who's going to design the apartments, because it has to look really good, because I need to get paid a lot, because property in Santa Monica costs a lot. I have to build all of these pieces. I have to put them all together, and I have to bind them all together with contracts. So I can guarantee that if an investor or a bank puts money into this project, there is going to be an apartment building sitting right there on that corner in 3 years, just like I promised. Because if that's not the case, then someone is going to get in trouble, probably me, which is one of the reasons I have to have an LLC. So I'm doing this as a business, not as an individual. Because if I took that risk as an individual, the bank would be mad and it would come after me personally. As opposed to if you get financing from a bank for your project, the financing from the bank based upon minimum guarantees, based upon what the forecasted revenues are going to be, or if you get money from the SBA or whatever, you want to make sure that the project comes off so that you don't actually end up left holding the bag. So you do have to actually build the project in such a fashion that it can go forward and can generate the revenue and if you can't do that, if you don't do the development, you can't do that because you don't have all the pieces that you need, because everyone you want to work with is going to want to see pieces of paper that say you own the script, that you've done film analytics, that you've got sales agent, so you know where you're going to sell it. All of these pieces, you know what cast is going to be in it. You know why that cast is in it. So at the
You're,
$2 million level, it is not guesswork.
Michael, go ahead, and then I have something to.
Mhm.
I was just looking in the comments, and Stephen just said, who is the underwriter for these loans? Now, I'm not sure if he was talking about production or if he's talking about development. I'm here really because I've helped people with development. We work with every bank in the country. Our job is to figure out how to get you that funding. It could be many different techniques, but if you're asking us, it's a bank underwriter, or maybe 5 banks at once, or maybe 2 different types of loans or 4 different types of loans at the same time. But the underwriter, we underwrite the loan first to make sure that it's going to pass muster, then we bring it to a bank. So I'm not sure if that was targeted at me or for production. So
And if I can be clear about that. So when it comes to development financing, you go to Michael, he's going to take care of it himself. He will underwrite it, he'll take it to banks and get you your financing. When you're talking about production financing, and you're going through something like the SBA or NorCal or Lendistry, you're going to have a group like that come on board with you. You're going to have two elements that a finance institution or bank's going to want to see. They're going to see risk mitigation. They're going to want to see collateral. The collateral is in the form of a distribution sales agreement with minimum sales guarantees, which we've discussed. The risk mitigation is in the form of analytics data, which is a bank's going to look at that and go, who's your audience? How are you going to find them? What's the saturation of that audience? How are you going to reach them? How are you deploying this? So all those things, those are the bookends of development, and everything in between, building social media, the legal setup, budgets and schedules that are bondable. That is all part of the big package of development that when you take to financing, the bank is going to go, okay, you're with Lendistry, so that's going to help mitigate some of that risk, but they're still going to want, and they're going to underwrite at each bank at that level. The bank is going to have an underwriter that's going to look at that, and they're going to look at, do you need a guarantor? And if so, a lot of banks provide guarantors. These are high net worth individuals that can sign on, and they get a huge tax break, and they're usually affiliated with the bank in some relationship so that it's benefit to both parties. So you're talking about you're opening up a large can of worms here, but the simple version of that question, I'd like to get back to what you were talking about earlier in a moment here. The simple version is during development, Michael's going to underwrite that, take you to all the banks, get you the money. It's a fairly straightforward process. When you're talking about production financing, it's a little more complicated with moving parts, but all those pieces are addressed directly, and we have all the things necessary because we developed this properly. If I may get back to your issue, which was turnaround, you skipped across the upper atmosphere of the core issue of turnaround. Turnaround is what I refer to as a last ditch effort.
Mm-hmm.
I say that because I came really close to going into turnaround on a project I did once. And so much so that I called Patrick Ingram over at Ingram Studios, and they're a company that actually picks up things and turn around and takes them to people like Lionsgate and Sony. And I was like, Patrick, I'm going to need you to pick up this project and turn around. And he laughed for 5 minutes straight because he and I do not see eye to eye. I don't agree with turnaround. He develops projects to turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
I've never used it. I came this close. I finally, Region Entertainment called me that Monday and said, hey, we'd like to pick it up. And things went on. Turnaround is your safety net. It is, you get your package done, you get everything together. You've got your cast, you've got your analytics, you got your distribution deal.
Could you back up, and for people that are new, can you just, in a very brief, explain what turnaround is? I'm not sure everyone understands what it is.
Turnaround is the process by which you take a packaged project and you take it to a third party, much like somebody like, I think some of the turnaround companies like Magnolia Pictures, Ingenious, Fox Searchlight. You take it to a third party and you go, look, I've done all I can do. I just can't do anything with this. Can you guys pick it up and get it out to the marketplace? And there's been massive examples of turnaround. I think in your turnaround studies, Jeff, you've had The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg was in turnaround. The Lincoln Lawyer was in turnaround.
Oh God, so many projects in
Oh,
turnaround.
yeah. So basically, again, the simple thing is you've got a project, you've taken it as far as you can, and you just can't take it further. So you need somebody who's got longer legs than you do, who can pick that up and has a market for it already in place. Now, why would anybody acquire anything in turnaround?
So you're
Because
selling, sorry to interrupt you, Ray, you're selling your package. You do not own it anymore. You are handing it over. If you're the writer on it, you'll get your writer's credit, but that's it. You're done.
yeah,
But one of the reasons that I personally wanted to make sure everyone understood what turnaround was, and I understand Ray considers it a failure, but Jeff is describing it as if you could not get your project made, but you've done everything else, so it's fully developed. If you're at that point,
you
most
can
likely
recoup your loss.
but you
can
also
recoup your loss.
but you also came to me for development funding. That is a potential way for you to get back your development cost. And that's why I wanted to very much focus on, not that I ever want anything to go to turnaround, but it is a safety valve.
If I may interject, any turnaround study is meant to illustrate, and I don't mean that it's constructed to illustrate, it's reflecting what's out there in the world, but it is meant to illustrate that there is value in the project and often value above the cost of development. Notwithstanding, these numbers may sound big to folks, 50 to 70, $80,000. A lot of pictures go for 100K to a $500,000 to $1 million, $1.5 million. I'm not trying to paint pretty pictures, but I'm saying I really want to know that you can, for any investors, you can recoup. And then beyond that, like any distributed film study, you could possibly make a little bit of money and soften the edges around what you've done. But I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just saying, hey, investors always want to know what's the worst case scenario.
That's what turnaround is. You basically, if it
It's the
doesn't
worst
cover,
case scenario.
right. So if your project doesn't cover its costs, we should move on to the rest of the questions. But if it doesn't
Yeah,
cover,
let's get through this. But the short version, to put a pin in it, is turnaround is your absolute last safety net. And you can usually sell it at about 100 to 130% of your development cost, but you're out. As Grace pointed out, you just sold it. You don't own it anymore. They'll honor the writer's agreement if it's under WGA. They will take care of that. But as a producer, you just failed. You got your investor their money back, so they're not going to come throwing eggs at your window. But you didn't get your film made as a producer.
cool. So I want to go on to the next question, which is,
Go ahead.
so Oleg says, I have a hunch that a project of mine can be developed with your help for purchase by a first look deal studio or a major. Is there room for such business, or is that just a dream? You can't really answer that without seeing it, right?
Yeah, I'd have to see the project, but I think what you're looking at is you look at a project, and if you develop, we're talking about almost the hybrid of turnaround now. You're talking about you develop it and you've got somebody who has a first look deal and they go, oh, you package this, it's great to go. Okay, well, we'd like to pick it up. But at that point, if you've gone through all the development, you have all the resources, why are you selling it to a studio and losing 90% of your profit? Just go make it yourself.
Yeah.
You've gone that far.
Yeah. Rusty asks, how do distribution markets currently react to either partially or fully AI generated content? Is it negative, or is it going to be more positive going forward, or they just not care? Assuming it's original, quote unquote, original content, do they care? Does a distributor care if the content is AI generated or created with generative AI or assistive? Everything's created with assistive AI these days, but created with generative AI. Rene?
Me personally, I get so many questions about how do you use AI? I don't. Okay, number two, yeah, AI can. So in the film business, there are people who are really creative people. They're writers or whatever, they're painters, etc. Very creative people. AI will not replicate that. AI can make you potentially a film, but a film has a heart plus in it. That's just me talking, but I, you know,
I think they're more wondering about the intellectual property right issues. So, and whether or not distributors care. So what do you
I
think?
th- I think distributors care.
Mhm.
I'm not convinced that you can do a whole movie with AI. I think AI is not there yet. Obviously, on YouTube, you won't have any issues. On a rev share platform, Tubi, it's up to the product. But I don't think somebody yet still is going to pay you for 100% created with AI. I think perhaps I'm wrong and I haven't seen something that quality, but I think this came up last week in a call. We were discussing about an animated project, and we thought, oh, let's do it with AI. But the creators at the end said, let's do it with Unreal Engine. You can predict, you can work. AI is not there.
Okay.
It jumps all over.
I think you're looking at people are all excited about new technologies. When the motion capture first came out and you could animate a face, they did things like Beowulf, which was a huge flop. They did other things that were using all this new technology. And I think what happens is people get so excited, oh, I found a new answer to make. There's no new answer to making a film. You make a film the same way that Cecil B. DeMille was making them in the 20s. Better technology, but it's simply just a tool. And I think when you try to make it the thing, it's going to fail. I think it comes back to you got to make a movie, and as Jeff said, with real human beings who have hearts and creative. Look at AI as a tool. Period.
So the next question is an experience question from a new screenwriter here. Working with an entity like MPMG, does a writer need to come to the table with coverage and copyright, etc., from the beginning, or is that something that you will help them with?
They should get a copy written immediately before they show it to anybody, including Moving Pictures Media Group. So that's pretty simple process. You go to the us.gov copyright office.
Copyright.gov. And actually,
Copyright.gov. And then you go register it. It takes 20 minutes and $65, and you have an account with your copyright number. Then you can submit it. Protect yourself first. But other than that, I've had people who have come to us with just an idea and they need a screenwriter. I've had people who have had full scripts. And all that comes down to this is going to impact your development costs, depending on what you need and what you don't need. So yeah, you can come to us at any stage, anywhere you go. First, copyright material, protect yourself.
go to copyright.gov and register your screenplay or your book. And if you don't know how to do that, you can read up
Call
on
us
it,
up.
contact a
Call
lawyer.
us up. We'll help you through it.
All right, cool. How much do advertisers pay for product placement? That somebody, let's say, some films they have gotten. I knew this guy that did Christian films, and he would always get people who had books to sell or whatever courses. They would pay him to produce his film, but it was very low budget stuff, I think.
Let me save a lot of time from dragging this question out. It's like, how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
That's incorrect. That's an incomplete question. I will tell you product placement and a brand integration will pay it's not a set, oh, I'm paying you this. It depends on who the audience is, how much they can access, what it's important to them. I've had $500,000 films that half my budget was covered by product placement and brand integration. I've had $5 million budgets that I had less than $80,000 in product placement and brand integration. It's a nebulous question that we should not waste time on at this point.
All right, cool. Next question is, what sort of appetite are you seeing for content with black leads? It seems so many times that they're harder to get people to believe in, but then there are great successes like American Fiction, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, I think, or One of Them Days. So do you work with people that I guess it's a question for Jeff. Are there good markets, or does it affect the market for projects to have a person of color in the in lead positions? Can it help it? Can it harm it? Or does it just vary by project?
I work on a lot of projects that have people of different races and all of that, and different backgrounds, different nationalities, all of that. Me personally, I love having diversity because you can spread your audience around, you know, and draw people to a concept that they might not have looked at otherwise. But different audience, I'm reading a report about African Americans specifically today, and how they use media to get informed about their decisions for what to consume, including media and entertainment. And there are different strata of places that they go to get their information. And there's different slices of market that are extremely viable for one group or another. Me, my family is a mixed family, Asian and European. And I see the country going that way, no matter what people want to say. The whole country's going that way. So I think that diversity is fantastic, you know, and I see markets for it all the time, but you have to study each project individually. And I would never say, don't cast that way, because it's really what story, what heart, what you're trying to present.
And it goes back to you're building an audience, and when you're doing development, finding who your audience is, that's going to determine is a African American lead appropriate or not. I think it's what's the movie you're making, who you're making it for, and that's going to determine who your cast is. And I think that you can put a pin in that pretty quick.
I think that's true. I think that's exactly right. So I'm working on a film adaptation of a classic novel that's in the public domain. Christmas Carol, Pride and Prejudice, Great Gatsby, etc. It's Great Gatsby in the public domain? I'm not sure that it is. Anyway, does that inhibit working, how much the project might sell for, working with sales agents and distributors, or does it make it more likely to sell because it's based upon an existing story that people already like?
You've been great at hitting me with two-pronged answers here. The first prong of that is nothing. Everything in public domain is not in public domain. We've had numerous clients who've said, oh, it's in public domain, and they wind up in a lawsuit because they didn't get a clearance report.
Yeah.
And they didn't get a chain of title. And somebody owns that public domain. Somebody thought that Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan was in the public domain. It is clearly not. There is the Burroughs estate. In fact, I know half the people in the Burroughs estate personally. Nothing is public domain. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, if it's a known project or known entity, like we have somebody wanting to remake The Virginian, which was a very popular Western in the 50s, made into 3 films and 2 series. And they're like, oh, The Virginian's in public domain. No, it's not. First of all. Second of all, you got to get a clearance, then you got to get an assignment, and then you've got to get the rights to it. The second part of that answer is, let's assume all that happens and you do get it, even though it's public domain. It depends on, can you generate an audience for it? And it's going right back to the same old thing that we keep tripping across, which is, can you build an audience for this? It doesn't matter if it's based on a novel. If it's based on a novel and it's got an audience already, you're 5 steps ahead. That's great. But are they a current audience? So your analytics is going to determine, is there an audience currently for that?
That makes sense. Christina asked, does merchandising ever precede production, like t-shirts or dolls, as part of development for an animated production?
Yes, if you're doing a Kickstarter campaign, absolutely. But if you're just going out and taking it to a distributor or to a network, then you're going to see if there's actually an audience and how it builds up in season 1. And if there's, look at Archer, which is a very irreverent animated series that FX ran. And there was nothing on Archer for first 3 seasons. Now there's everything. There's little bobbleheads. There's all sorts of merchandising because they found an audience to saturate that merchandise with.
That's Disney makes its money on merchandise more than
Absolutely it does.
So as part of your package, I guess they mean in PMG, part of your package involve actually creating a pitch deck as well as the analytics, etc.
Pitch decks are pretty useless. I've actually sat at a bank with a banker and he looked at a pitch deck and lifted it up and dropped it in the trash can. Bankers want to see numbers. They want to see an audience. They want to see, is there money to be made on this? Pitch deck looks pretty, but it's not really helping you.
I think a pitch deck works great if you've got investors and they have to be bought in on a.
Sure, you
It's
want to make
different
it
with
pretty,
banks.
and yeah, you make it, but you also need to have analytics, hard data, distribution, some other elements in there that, you know, eventually anybody with any financial sense is going to want to look at. So I would not waste a lot of money on pitch decks. I don't do lookbooks. I don't do any of that stuff because I've sat in banks and watched them just drop it in the trash.
Mhm.
So
Let's see.
may I address, somebody had a question early on that we just skipped over, which was about distribution, or which was about documentaries and the market.
Oh yeah.
The market on documentaries, as we mentioned, Jeff, I think I was right with about what, 30 cents on the dollar is what Netflix is paying for documentaries.
Yeah,
Having
something like that.
having said that, and Rene, you and I have had this conversation as well about documentaries. Documentaries are this weird format that is not very easily monetized because nobody's paying full price for them. But if you get a documentary, we have a person who just approached us with a documentary today, as a matter of fact, and this subject matter is really important. And there's pharmaceutical companies that are behind it. There's a lot of people who would like to see this out there. So if they are sponsoring of that, say you get somebody who wants to sponsor a documentary because they want the word out, and maybe you're getting 30 cents on the dollar, but they're writing off 100% of their expense and they're using that as a marketing tool. If you're using a documentary as a marketing tool, God bless you, go forward, because now you can write off everything as an expense. But if you're making a documentary because of the love of the subject, great, but just understand it's going to possibly and quite probably
Be hard.
be financially unsuccessful.
Go ahead.
Yeah, So I worked on a documentary called The Wrecking Crew, one of the greatest music.
That's my favorite one. I love the Wrecking Crew.
So it's fantastic, but he struggled for several years just being able to amortize the needle drop because it was so big.
It's such a
Okay,
great
I also
show.
worked on a small, we had no idea, a small football documentary about Texas called, that went up for an Oscar. Oh my God, I can't remember it, but their image is on my website. Fantastic film. Monetizing those things is a risky proposition. And many of the people I work with on documentaries have another thing attached to it. It has an educational component. It, like Ray said, it has a premium potential component, etc. Nonprofit organizations. I worked on a film called Soul about human trafficking, and they were bringing in corporate sponsors. So you have to think of a multi-part world.
I like
Yeah.
documentaries, and especially stuff like The Wrecking Crew, which if you haven't seen it, stop whatever the hell it is you're doing and go watch the show. It is to die for. The best part of music ever. But you can make documentaries pay. It's one of my favorite art forms. I like it, and I think you can make it pay, but it is not a standard film. It's just
It
not.
is a strategic business model specifically tailored to what you're creating, and you need
Right.
to have an exit strategy before you go into it.
Yeah, especially if you're gonna spend, it's one thing if you're spending $150,000, that's X amount of, that's not a huge quantity of money, especially because you are probably gonna be able to find a market. You're probably gonna be able to find ways to subsidize that cost with outside help. But I've seen people try to do $1 million documentaries, and I'm like, oh, that'll be a hassle.
The Wrecking Crew spent in that neighborhood.
Yeah, but given the people that they worked with.
Yeah, the needle drop was.
Here's my example that I use. And there was a documentary that came out I don't know, 40 years ago now. And it was one of the best documentaries I ever saw, called The World's Fastest Indian. And it
Oh
was
yeah.
a guy who broke the land speed record with an beat up old Indian motorcycle.
Mhm.
And it made $0 for 40 years. And then Sir Anthony Hopkins saw the documentary, was inspired, and got behind making the movie version of it with Anthony Hopkins. And the documentary sold in conjunction with the film release for the rights. It sold for $4 million.
Yep.
Can you make money on a documentary? Sure. Do you want to wait 40 years? So
Well-
have a good marketing strategy moving in and know how you're going to get out of it. Are you going to get out of it by making it a tax write-off? Are you going to get out of it by getting sponsorship? But do not expect to monetize a documentary the way you would film or television.
Yes, I 100% agree. I think when I've seen people be successful, so I'll just tell the tiniest story. So I was hanging out at this one of those events you go to where they've got panelists talking about making documentary, and there was this, everybody was talking about how hard it was to get their documentary funded, on and on they went. And it was like this one guy at the end was just looking really perplexed. And they got to him and he goes, I have to say, I have none of the problems these people have, not one. He says, I made a film about the Seder Motorcycle Club, of which I was a member, in West Hollywood. People were handing me money the second I mentioned I wanted to do the film. I had so much money. I had as much money as I wanted to produce the film. And they gave me footage. And it was such a, and it's just, so it depends on the project that you're doing. And it depends on how much support you have. With the Wrecking Crew, that was such a great thing because they worked on with every major musical artist for what, decades. They were the band, the Uber band. And so that thing is going to pay off forever. But
yeah, I think we've gotten the documentary thing handled. I think there was a couple more questions you wanted.
Yeah, there was one. So one person, Michael, wanted to reach out to you whether or not you could actually help them on it. The other thing I wanted to mention was, if somebody wants to has a short film and it was successful in festivals and contests, can they reach out to you and talk about, listen, how can we make this into something that might be a feature, or is that sort of too far back to work with you?
No, that's perfect. Now, again, you're looking at short format like documentaries, hard to monetize, but if you use it as a marketing tool to build a feature based on that, great idea. We can absolutely help you get that developed.
Proof of concept.
Yep, exactly.
And it's got awards, so it's already got name, which is
Perfect.
good.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, so we've covered a lot of content tonight. If you signed up for this event, I'll make an edited version of this video and I'll ship it out to you. And there may be some other follow-up information coming from MPMG or Film Funding or whatever. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me or reach out to MPMG, reach out to funding.com, Michael Praver. I always look forward to hearing from you. And thank you for taking the time to hang out with us tonight. It's one of the reasons we like doing these events, is because a lot of times people spend quite a lot of time and quite a lot of money struggling to produce a film when it's never going to work, because they don't know what development is, and they don't understand how distribution works, and they don't understand how to get minimum guarantees. All of us have seen those failures, and they're very painful because people waste a lot of time and they waste a lot of money with something that's never going to move forward. So hopefully if the information that we've talked about, just specifically in terms of the fact that there's a bunch of things you have to do to make a $3 million, $4 million, $5 million product film work, like just work financially and not put you in the poorhouse. And whether you're doing development, no matter how, you have to do development in order to make those projects go. Now you have some understanding of what development involves, and I hopefully that will turn out to be helpful to you, and you understand how distribution works. Thank you very much for hanging out with us, and we'll have another event in a few weeks talking about marketing films before, during, and after release. And hopefully, if you're thinking about producing a project, you'll find those useful as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.